Let's talk USA and Canada, 1985 to 2025. 40 years, folks, 40 years. How I came up with this was actually tonight, today with my daughter spending time, and I sat down and I watched a retro movie, an old movie from the 80s, and it just snapped on me watching that Hollywood production. And it was kind of funny. It was all about Chicago based movie, an old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. He plays a Soviet cop, Red Heat. But in there's a whole bus scene, and it's Canada to Montreal, or sorry, Montreal to Chicago, and these two buses play a game of chicken. But you see the Montreal bus and you see the Chicago bus, and that really struck me in my childhood. In that year, 1985, one of my uncles had finished welding, learning to weld, deep sea courses, diving courses, and it was at the West Edmonton Mall. We had submarines placed in the world's biggest mall, the expansion done 1985. I remember that clearly. And that was the end of my uncle. He had his welding ticket, did his diving school, and he was off to the races to the United States of America. He never came back. To this day, he lives there. Came back just for my grandmother's funeral about a decade and some back. He came back for that funeral and quickly back to the United States. No interest to ever come back and live and work and exist in Canada again. Loves the family, all that, but had no interest anymore in Canada. And folks, what's really special here is for Canadians, Americans, you're not really going to appreciate this, but for Canadians, we had a cross-country busing system known as Greyhound that does not exist anymore. The only Greyhound that exists in Canada does not run east or west. In fact, in Canada, you have to go through multiple busing organizations to get east to west in Canada. It is a big pain in the butt. It's super expensive. However, from 1985 until today, USA never ended Greyhound services from all major cities in Canada to all major cities in the United States. In fact, when Canada shut down Greyhound, USA said, we'll buy it. They bought it. It's American now. American Greyhound lines. Those buses still run Montreal, Toronto, all the boroughs, all the major cities, all the way out through to Alberta, British Columbia too. They still run American owned and operated, not Canada. So as a Canadian or an American, you can still travel very easily on American Greyhound lines, remaining unchanged since 1985, but yet Canadians can't go easily east to west in their own country. Absolutely done by the Canadian government and the Canadian foolish people. I've talked about this in our postal service. American Postal Service still runs. Canada's is on a slippery slope. And if you ever participate, if you like to mail things, legal documents, I've used Canada Post. It may be, 3 to 4 days, but it's pennies on the dollar, literally in the $20 to $40 range for the same thing that would cost you $2 will cost you 10 times that in the private sector, private companies. That's a fact. America understands all these things, whether it be their military, any of their government services are very, very fine-tuned, and they keep all these things in place. That's just one thing I wanted to highlight before I get into this, that America has retained all of that. Canada has shut down all operations for the United States. It's in fact been now almost 6 years that Canada doesn't operate any of that, which is very sad for a country like Canada, because these things should just be common sense for all Canadians. It should be an easy problem solving solution that, no, that's the worst thing you could shut down is that cross country service, because Canada is so spread out, this Great Wall of Canada, and very isolated rurals, that that kind of service makes full economic sense. There's no real argument against taxpayers on such a service. That was monumental. Now it's interprovincial garbage. If you try to navigate yourself busing across Canada, you will be in for a rude awakening. Your costs have gone up by a factor of 10 if you can even properly organize yourself. I know I had to do it in an emergency type situation from Ontario to Alberta with another Albertan just 2 years ago, and that experience was shocking, disturbing, stressful. The day after day, jumping buses, hotels here, oh, this interprovincial system, new line of busing, just garbage. Garbage in a country like Canada, so sparsely populated with so much extra along the way and rules and differences. Canada is not moving together in nation building. We've been absolutely moving apart since 1985, meaning we're more divided than we ever were before. And I'll go on to more things now in this video. I just wanted to hit that just to start off with it. USA has kept these powerful things in place. Canada's destroyed all of theirs, meaning Canada wants nothing to do with that. That's the narrative it's been long before Donald J. Trump. It has nothing to do with Donald J. Trump. So another thing, Canadians, as I got into my uncle, and that's just one uncle, I have many actual family members who've moved and went to the United States and never came back. They're happy there. They're never going to come back. No interest to come back. No interest to ever be a part of the Canadian model ever again. So they lived under universal health care. They lived under everything, and they're perfectly fine in the United States. And again, in their opinion, which is multiple opinions, two sides of a family in that, people talk about a lot of things about the United States. When it comes to passports, okay, from 1985 all the way up to 2020, Canadians like my uncle with just trade tickets, not only could all Canadians easily go to the United States, I shouldn't say that, sorry, 2007, work, I should have said. We're going to go back for passports. From 1985 all the way to 2007, Canadians could easily go to the United States with just their ID. There was no border crossing issues. It was, who are you? Yeah? Okay, what's your business here? Okay, no problem. You're Canadian. See you later. Have a nice day. Did it all as a child. Worst thing would ever be is it was such heavy traffic in those decades and all the way up that America might screen you coming back to see at the border, or I should say Canada, to make sure they got their taxes. That was always an issue, right? You can always get better deals in the United States for products and bring them back to Canada, much cheaper. And of course, the cigarettes, the alcohol, and that's just a few of the sin taxed items. There's lots others, fireworks. I know all that as a young child, went through all that. And then something changed in 2007 under George W. Bush. Something changed. And what was that change in 2007? To put it in perspective, everybody, we had a new conservative government under a prime minister named Stephen Harper. Well, I'm going to tell all Canadians that don't want to hear this, and maybe you don't want to hear these radical changes that happened between Canada and the United States under several presidencies, okay? This is going to expand Democrats and Republicans alike. It's undeniable truth. So Stephen Harper came into power in 2006. I've tried to explain this to so many conservatives who want not to believe it. And again, Charlie Kirk has an even better video than the one he did just 2 weeks before his death. And it was actually Jonathan Bahai who brought this to me. And I had seen it before. And it was an interview with a Canadian on Canada. But he does a monologue before that. And it's actually a lengthy one on Canada. And I rewatched that goes into a lot of detail. And what I liked about that is he first opens up with 40 years of Liberal government. And then he shakes his head, auto-corrects himself with 16 years. Now with Carney, right? But then it was only 15 years. It's all good, but he started with 40 years. And this is the 1985 truth. And it's a Brian Mulroney truth that there's so much that happened with Canada transitioning away from the morality of America, away from the security of Canada and USA agreed to by Canada. And let's just look at this in 2006 and what first George W. Bush had to deal with. And his administration, red flags come up, right? The first transition was in 2006 under Stephen Harper. The first thing he did was transform immigration forevermore for Canada. And it would be mass immigration under a new UN initiative brought to the UN without the allies of World War II, meaning with no recognition from the United States or even presenting that to the government or the administration of the United States. They brought the Century Initiative, conservative initiative, think tank, and under Stephen Harper, he immediately implemented mass immigration. Canadians and for Americans, this happened. And that was in 2006. We went from 83,000 immigrants, which at that time, you can look at the Statistics Canada and the Government of USA statistics, 14% of those immigrants just the year before, 83,000, 14% were from the United States of America. Then we got into all kinds of Eastern European countries, yes, Japan, Philippines, but these are all countries that have strong relationships and immigration relationships with the United States. Same with the Eastern European countries, that dominated it. The following year, and yes, India was there too as a Commonwealth country, but nowhere near what it would transition to after, let alone China, communist China, just the following year. And you can imagine George Bush in late 2007 implementing Canadians at the border, all airports. First, it was all airports, 2007. If you were going to fly to the United States with Canadian ID or whatever, you now needed a passport. You could not get on an American plane without a passport. And just so everybody knows, 2001 came and went. 9/11, 2001 came and went. There still was no requirement for Canadians to have any passports at all to go to the United States. The numbers that rang in 2007 for the year end of 2006 under the Harper government and the first half of 2007 showed an astonishing immigration rate, more than 4.5 times the highest immigration rate Canada had ever seen in any modern time post-World War II. Immigration off the charts. And there was a whole bunch of new countries, Muslim countries from Africa, Middle East, and all the conflict zones. Now remember, we're still in wartime with the United States. The United States is huge on security, and their northern neighbor goes to mass immigration from all the problem areas and attacks on the United States. Canada opened a floodgate under Stephen Harper. Within 1 year, every old stock Canadian lost their right to fly to the United States without a passport. You now had to have a Canadian passport. You now had to go through serious screening. Now, there was more changes that came 2 years later with the United States. And of course, this is still under the Stephen Harper government. And now in the USA, we had a change of government. You should all know in 2009, that was Barack Obama, who now is facing more than 320,000 mass immigrants into Canada. 320,000 a year under Stephen Harper. A radical shift never ever seen in Canadian history by American standards or even Canadian standards. This is epic immigration. You can look at it and say, wow, every 3 years there's going to be 1 million new Canadians in Canada. Exponential growth off the charts. And let's now look at the statistics of where Canada's acquiring their preferred immigrants. Massive from the Middle East, massive from India, massive from communist China, like Canada has never, ever seen before. And Canada has a Century Initiative, not bound into law in the United Nations. In fact, it's sitting there, and at that point, there were only 18 countries out of 193 who supported Canada's initiative. That didn't bother the Harper government. There was literally no opposition from the Liberals, the NDP, the Green, the Bloc, none of it. It rolled on in mass immigration, expanding year after year. And in 2009, under Barack Obama and his administration, they said, we can't allow any more Canadians to freely access the United States of America. No more. The security risks are off the chart. They're way past anything America's ever seen out of their northern neighbor, with really troubled countries at extreme conflict with the United States. Again, this is 8 years after 9/11, 2001. And this is the shift of Canada. It was literally 5 years after 9/11, the government of Canada under Stephen Harper said that this would be a good idea with the United States of America to bring in all the conflict zone countries in mass immigration into Canada. And they thought in their pea brains, right, Canadians, that this is where it really upsets me as a born-bred Canadian, multi-generation, who grew up and lived in a free access to the United States as a child. It's funny, parents sent me a link here, and I accepted it from a small town, Roch-Percy, southern Saskatchewan, where as a child, I did these cross-border trips and sneaking things in from the United States past Canadian inspections, right? And hiding it and being told, shh, you don't tell them, right? I mean, nothing serious, right? Just kid stuff, maybe fireworks, serious business. But, you did those things freely. But by 2009, nobody in Canada was allowed to freely cross the American border anymore. Do you blame Donald Trump for any of that? When we clearly have George W. Bush, Republican, for phase 1. Then we have Barack Obama for phase 2, pure Democrat. And if you haven't been reading about all the things with Barack Obama, I know Americans get their system and with Republicans, Democrat, but I'm a Canadian looking at this from my side, and I don't see a difference when I look at laws and changes, whether it was Republican and Democrat, as I go through these things. I see American presidents doing their job, responding to massive changes from Canada onto the United States in threats to their international security and peace, really bringing the threats on. And it wouldn't matter Democrat or Republican president, the people and their mandate as president, their presidential powers as commander-in-chief, absolutely forces them to act. They will act. It's their mandate, and they did. And so everybody at this point, Donald J. Trump isn't even in the picture. He's not even a functioning member of either Democrats or Republicans on any major level. On the political sphere, he's not even involved. Politics is far, far from Donald J. Trump in 2009. So 2007, 2009, nothing to do with Donald J. Trump. And while people may think these changes are little, they're not. They're huge and explosive. Huge and explosive. It's at this time I'm going to shift now. Going back, we're going to do another layer here. It's called NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. This was the ability for U.S. and Canadian citizens to cross-border work very easily, very cheaply. In fact, the costs were very minor. This is the time when what was called a TN visa, a temporary national visa for Canadians to USA. There are so many people who ran on this visa from Canada. And it was in place, everybody, all the way up to 2020. So you could easily go to the United States for hardly any cost at all, a little bit of paperwork with the embassy, and yes, out of pocket, yes, paying in USD. Total costs averaged about $300 USD. Now, this is to temporarily work up to 3 years' time in the United States of America. This is for anybody with a profession, accredited profession, or a professional organization where you're a designation in that organization. So, in the primary sector, all union workers, all operators, engineers, laborers even, painters, welders, blacksmiths, boilermakers, pipe fitters, you name it, there was an easy entry level for that. You could easily find an American employer. Why? Because there were no costs, hardly, to that American employer. If you had your gumption, you went and traveled to the USA, you call the consul and say, hey, I'm here, I'm touring all these companies. My baby brother did the exact same thing, graduated engineering school, went out to Virginia, went through a great military show there, almost took that. He was employed for about 6 months, and then he got transferred from there back to Canada, back to his hometown in Edmonton, a joint venture with the United States government, cross-military. He ended up back in Canada. But that is how easy it was for all Canadians, and equally as easy for all Americans. That ran everybody all the way through up to 2020. However, now with the visa requirements changing post-NAFTA, when we lost NAFTA and went into the USMCA, that all ended. Americans had to shut it down. Why would that be? Well, we're going to go back into that radical immigration that costs all old stock Canadians their rights and access to the United States, that was freely accessible for all Canadians without major screening that's imposed on the rest of the world. Canada lost all that preferred status on their mass immigration. Well, I can tell you by 2015, the transfer from Harper to Justin Trudeau, we were going from 375,000 a year to then 4.25 under Justin Trudeau. By the time Justin Trudeau ended, we were well on our way to 1 million. Under Mark Carney, he's nailing the 1 million. Yes, we had a 1.2 million from the COVID time. That was a combination of multiple years and processes all fitted into one. And now that's staple. It's like Mark Carney said, well, it doesn't matter that's multiple years. We're going for 1 million every year. We were told we shrunk immigration by radical amounts. It turns out to be a lie. Now, all of that time when we hit 2020 under NAFTA, the end of NAFTA and the new USMCA came with a pile of security arrangements and guarantees and an end to visas for Canadians. That was the end. Chrystia Freeland and a Democrat senator from the United States wrote that in and said no more Canadians under the following security clearances and high skills or wealth or establishment. Everybody else, it's too hard for America to process who is and isn't a security threat. The costs are substantial. We can't take the risk. That's the truth. And folks, Donald J. Trump ended his term. This was completed by Joe Biden, picked up by Donald J. Trump. And literally now, with all the reports they've analyzed from Joe Biden's time, regardless of what you hear, it's likely there will not be any visas, as we're seeing Donald J. Trump react. Now, everybody in their elbows up. Remember, Canada transitioned itself record off the charts in their Century Initiative against all peace and security internal arrangements with the United States, long running for more than 60 years, that they abandoned after 9/11. Not the USA, Canada abandoned. And I'm also going to get into what happened with military funding in 2006 too. So Canada, as well as transitioning to mass immigration in 2006 with all the radical worst countries with the most conflicts with the United States, from an immigration the year before that was focused on the United States, Eastern Europe allies, NATO allies, and other allies, Japan and Philippines, that have strong relationships and history with the United States, very secure. Again, we transitioned from that and we mass immigrated all of the threats of the United States is our new source of immigration in Canada. So, and I just lost the point where I was at here, and it's 2020, Joe Biden and what Donald J. Trump had to take on. Oh yeah, the cancellation of even more visas and now massive more charges to screen out all of those from cartels, from security threats. These are all over the Middle East, India, South America, China, Beijing, countries that really truly hate America and are raised to hate America. We've flooded that into Canada, and that is the reason all the visas continually be shut down, ripped up, scrapped, even going as high as the H-1B visas. This is truth and reality. Donald J. Trump and the Trump administration are just doing what the Biden administration had to do with Canada, what the Trump administration before that had to do with Canada, and all the other administrations before. You'll see tit for tat. The higher and more radical Canada got, the more impositions and restrictions were placed on Canada. with the final nail in the coffin being today, 2025. And yes, you can say it's under a liberal government, but again, folks, go look at the true history. Canada began to do this in 2006 under Century Initiative, all conservative. Mark Carney was hired by Stephen Harper, a long-time conservative and banker, put into the position of prestigious Bank of Canada governor, went on with Stephen Harper for all of those 8 years, went from that to London, England, under the Conservatives of UK, ran that for several years, and then finally switching back to the Liberals in prep for the next election. He could have easily been Conservative. If it hadn't been Pierre Poilievre and Poilievre polling the way he was, and Mark Carney coming in, he wouldn't. If it had been the other way around, and let's say Justin Trudeau was slaughtering Pierre Poilievre, he would have came in as Mark Carney, the conservative master. But he came in because he was the hand picked. This agenda, this war on America has been going on forever at absolutely all the expense of Canadians and First Peoples. They just don't see it. They don't want to believe it. They live week by week, literally some people even day by day in this country. Canada made that switch, that narrative a long time ago, and they've been a threat to the United States of America for many decades. And if folks ever want to see the truth of it, you'll find it's not USA who initiated all this. It's USA responding to all the initiatives of Canada. And it didn't matter for many decades which government it was. And we can go before Harper. The mass immigration may not have been there, but all the international narratives creating this idea of leading to China were well underway. We can see narratives against the family. It started actually in 1985 under Brian Mulroney. He gave a speech to the UN and he pied America in the face. He stood for the first time in Canadian history since World War II. He pied America in the face and he said, forget the American family unit because we're sacrificing the Canadian family unit. And they went on to the UN rights of the child. They sponsored Soviet Poland's narrative of taking away parental rights and giving the government, the state, rights over the family unit, the children, which is a complete violation, an absolute violation of everything that the UN is supposed to stand for, the Charter of the UN, by the Allies of World War II, 1945. If you ever read it in the Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter, you will find that it's all based, that it's the family unit is a fundamental unit of societies, and that you can't have a strong community, a strong state, or a strong country without the power of the family unit. And that Polish resolution, sponsored by Brian Mulroney, where he gave a speech to the English world, was the death blow for Canada, really, and where we really started and went. And again, all Liberals are corrupt and dirty. They are the worst party in Canada. The reason why I highlight Conservatives is because I identify more as a real Republican than I'll ever identify with anything else in Canada, everybody. And it's always been that way for me, whether I knew it or not. It's come definitely in the last 8 years of my life, maybe 9 years now. Was trying to get into Alberta independence, and then it's fixed Canada, always a Republican model based off the United States. And effectively now, where we are at the 51st state, it's really just, can we just end this evil, this crown? I don't want a war on America. I don't want to sponsor all these evil, atrocious countries in the world. I don't consider China evil, but I don't identify as a communist, Marxist, or Leninist. All of that is putrid to me. I was raised to never ever want that. I had glorious family members in many generations, again, old family, participating in all the wars, World War II, what communism represents, what fascism really represents in that socialism, because they're hand in hand. And I can't, with everything inside my soul and my being, I can't sit here, hate on the United States, and support a country that wants to transition to communism and China. I don't. And all the agendas are there. Everything Canada and all the premiers are working on today, including the worst being a toss-up between BC and Alberta. But these are not new. These are old. And we're really talking about many decades of Alberta conservative governments. And when we go back to the destruction and then subsequent death of a premier named Ralph Klein in Alberta, that was my all and everything in conservatism that I really believed in when I was still ignorant to what the Crown was. But that premier was that beacon of something, at least, that he was different. He was ruling autocratically like all the rest, and in the power of a king, because that's really what they all get in Canada, especially the premiers. Once they have a majority, they're unstoppable, complete autocrats. There's very little that restricts them and their cabinets. And he never overly abused. There's lots of him stealing from Alberta taxpayers too. I know that. He wasn't clean. Him and his wife weren't clean. Their family wasn't clean. But he definitely, as he was siphoning off, like all crown pigs at the trough do, he really did care about where Alberta was going. He did care about all the generations. There was a morality to that man. And that was a good conservative, that the best you could get ever in Canada, or hope to get. And that was in my lifetime. And now he was crucified by the Conservatives. They had him punted out of the party, voted him out with this liar, Stephen Harper, who proved to be amalgamated with all the Liberals because it's progressive conservative. I know Americans don't understand this. The closest they could probably understand is the Rhino Republican, but realistically, these are serious globalists who just want to fill their pockets in Canada, and they have no love of the Canadian people, none whatsoever. They're professional liars and actors. The worst you could ever imagine a Democrat, you can multiply this by quite a few times just for the Conservative. Never mind this NDP baloney, this Liberal baloney, Bloc, Green, it even gets worse. They are all of that evil too, and they are all pigs at the trough, but it's the Conservatives who really lie about it, those politicians. We have Doug Ford in Ontario. How you could say he's nothing but a Liberal in disguise. I don't know how anyone could get anything else other than that. There's many like that. How Premier Danielle Smith, who pretends to be this big ultra-conservative, can allow bottom surgeries of 17-year-olds when the lowest age has always been in Canada 18, and under the guise of, I'm going to restrict all these other things, but yet she's passing that at 17. Top surgeries can be done as early as 15. You won't find that in any state of the union. You find it in Mexico, sure, but up until her in Canada, there's never been any of that. And all under the guise, women out of sports, talking a lot like Trump, but then doing the most heinous of all crimes, right? The most liberal any liberal could present would be crucified for, you'd think, in Canada. And she got away with it under the guise of no men and women's sports, some of the Trump rhetoric, but then snuck through these most horrific crimes against children ever imaginable. Like literally in all of North America, for Canada and USA's entire history, you have to go to Mexico to see stuff like that, South America, and of course, out into other religious groups in the world. She snuck that through in Alberta, making it the lowest age. Just one example of her baloney. And Albertans can't see it because, well, she's conservative, hard conservative, she's great. It's like, that's like evil. That's child abuse, evil. It should be at least the age of 18. And if other Canadians, Americans don't know, that very leftist province, British Columbia, actually has the highest ages in Canada. It's a lot like USA states with the 21. BC says 19. So drinking and other things, 19, just like American states at the age of 21. Well, top surgeries, bottom surgeries, 19. At least that's something, right? But now Alberta is going to be 15 for permanent altering drugs, where if you take those therapies, you've changed your sex permanently. There's no going back. And of course, the surgeries, top and bottom, 15 to 17. And I don't know how Albertans can say they're Christian and go for that. Like, there's nothing of republicanism or supposed Christian conservatism about that. Yet she snuck that in. And Albertans just go like this: I don't care as long as there's no men and women's sports. Like, that's how she tricked you. And this goes on and on. It's just like the China transition. Alberta and BC are the two largest provinces transitioning to China in all of Canada. They lead the charge by leaps and bounds. And in fact, it was BC on Chinese immigration through Quebec and, of course, Alberta. But when mass immigration started in 2006, it's clear that Alberta's the number one destination for all the radical immigration and then net migration. Once people land in Canada, they quickly migrate to Alberta. That's why we have the massive unemployment rates in this country, and we're going down the toilet. And Trump highlighted this. He said it last week. Now, I just posted CNN pretty much highlighting Mark Carney, all his lies. It's the left side of it's the Democrats. CNN's a Democrat publication. So when CNN is highlighting that Trump is basically making an asshole out of Carney, has humiliated Carney, ended Mark Carney's banking empire. For Canadians and Americans who don't know, Mark Carney was the developer in 2020 for the transition of global financing into this Green New Deal agenda that, yes, Joe Biden signed on to with the Atlantic Charter. Donald J. Trump has ended all that officially just 2 days ago now. All the global banking establishments under that WEF are done. They've all pulled out, leaving Mark Carney and only the 10 premiers of Canada left. All of Europe left. As we all saw, they pledged all of that massive investment into the United States because they need the United States firepower if they want to hold back Russia. Because if USA goes, okay, Europe, F Americans, F Trump, F all, okay, no problem. You're on your own. Have fun with Russia. And I can promise you all, no different than World War II, like Germany marching through France and nearly the UK and so many of the European countries, literally within a week or two, right? Literally, Russia could do much, much more than that if there was no USA. Because USA is NATO. All that firepower, missile defense, everything being fired in Ukraine at Russia that comes from NATO, which is a NATO versus Russia, is entirely from the United States. The United States is what's holding Russia back. And if USA went like this to that whole Europe, you'd see that Russia snapped through Europe in a matter of weeks. It would change that fast if there was nothing of USA placed on those soils and USA said, nope, we're pulling the pin, you're on your own. This goes for North and South Korea. South Korea, if USA pulled the pin, North Korea would almost immediately take South Korea without any of that from the United States. This goes for Israel. Israel set up real well, but remember where they get all that. And if America said, you know what, sayonara, see you later, Israel will be done by the Middle East in probably less than a day. That's a fact. Maybe a week, I shouldn't say that. They have pretty good reserve defense forces, but if they were pounded on and USA cut it off, it'd probably be a week and Israel would fall. We can go on and on in the world like that. You pick a country, message me about it, and I'll let you know just how fast that country would be sayonara if USA pulled the pin. And Canada sits here from 2006. Stephen Harper, USA had always had a 4% NATO commitment with Canada. Canada started dropping it off, and it was well over 2% in 2005. It had been dropping from the 4%. America had a meeting with Canada and said, you must maintain 2%. Can you at least do that? That's under George W. Bush. And again with Obama, he met. You can all look at that speech. So that 2007, you're on Stephen Harper. You made a commitment in 2006 to 2% NATO minimum. And from 2.2%, you gutted the military to 1% NATO commitment overnight. So started selling off all the gold reserves, record amount of time, selling all the gold out of all Canadian mines. Not only the reserves went, and they went through London, and we chased those to India, and then to communist China, right? Broker deal. Then he started mining aggressively, more mining for Canadian gold ever done in Canadian history. And that was all being sold through London to China and India, two BRICS nations. So, folks, you tell me. We know when Mark Carney was appointed, that was Stephen Harper. We know when USA made its historical decisions, what years, where we are today with Donald J. Trump. And this has been work in progress, Canada does this. USA says, what the hell? That 1% NATO commitment, we're not even at 2%. We're at like 1.4 right now with Mark Carney hiring everybody. Mark Carney hired a foreign investment head from RBC who was just fined, shut down, and thrown out of the United States of America, meaning all RBC foreign investments through that City National Bank owned by RBC in the United States are Tostitos. They were fined mega millions of dollars that falls on all of you Canadians as the insurer. Mark Carney, this guy and his system, he's not the only one, there's a whole board there, RBC, but these are Carney's chartered bank buddies from Canada who've been fined in the mega millions for the crime of fraud, money laundering, drug trade and cartels, human trafficking, you name it. They've been thrown out already between TD and RBC, CIBC, and there's another, I guess I'm naming them. They've all been thrown out of 5 out of the 12 financial districts of the United States. None of those branches can operate there anymore. And I'm pretty sure in the next several years, it's going to be all American financial districts. You won't find any of these Canadian corrupted banks. So, Guzman is now named head of our defense procurement. A man who's been nailed in the United States for fraud, money laundering, all of it. White-collar criminal, don't worry, everybody. He's Canadian. He's under the crown. There's no such thing as a crime. All USA can do is fine them mega millions of dollars. They can't prosecute these crown loyalists, these Canadian subject citizens in the first class. They get a free pass. We get billed for it. But of course, they'll never operate in the United States. This is who Mark Carney has announced to run military procurement in Canada to make our NATO commitment, our NORAD commitments, and on and on. Do you think that guy is going to achieve anything the United States demands of Canada? Do you think we're going to make our 2% commitment? Do you believe that in the pre-budget of over $68 billion, that does not include any of the NATO commitment, which requires another $9 billion, $9.8 billion. So we're going to be at $78 billion, because it's 68 and some, works out to over $78 billion if we attempt with Guzman, whose last job got hammered for fraud, money laundering, human trafficking, you name it, in the United States of America. Does it sound like we're on a path to our 2% NATO commitment? Oh, and by the way, he has no experience, none whatsoever, in any military investment or contracting ever in the entirety of his entire resume. So he has no experience, no skill, no nothing in that area, none whatsoever. But we do know they were nailed in the United States just last year. That's why he's been moved to this position, because there's no position for him as a foreign investment guy for RBC going forward. Not if they want to rebuild their image. So now he works for Mark Carney, part of the cartel, part of the corruption, part of the war on America. Do you think he's going to work to that NATO commitment? Or do you think he's going to bleed Canadians dry and bring more red flags onto Canada? Do you think by 2026, when it's clear Canada is nowhere near any kind of absolute NATO commitment, and they have to answer again to the United States that, nope, we're still the same old piece of shit since Stephen Harper's transition in 2006. We hate you, America. We're building China, not you. We're the war on America. Whether Canadians like it or not, this is where we're at. This is how USA has to respond to us. And if you haven't noticed, it's getting more aggressive, more aggressive. We heard the economic. Now we're seeing the military prep in the United States Armed Forces by Commander-in-Chief Donald J. Trump just before the government lockdown, telling the American military to be ready to be able to train in cities. Again, what would be the big crisis in American cities? Is it for American cities, or is the crisis going to be in Canadian cities, like CNN just published, I've been telling you all week? And that's CNN giving you record unemployment Canada-wide. If they look at Alberta, your eyeballs will explode out of your head. We're at 8.9% unemployment right now. And this just as of August. It's gone up way higher here. We're in third quarter now. We might even be toppling over 9%. This isn't COVID. This isn't businesses shut down. This isn't any of that. This is massive depression-style unemployment. If we hit 10%, 15%, there's going to be literally blood in the streets. That's how bad it will get, especially for Alberta. The rest of Canada, 10, 12%. That's going to mess this country up real bad. And if you're USA looking at this, and Mark Carney elbows up, and these 10 premiers going, I don't care, kill all the Canadians. They're that nutty, and they're on this Agenda 2050, that again, everybody, well, Mark Carney's appointing these bankers thrown out for their corruption, their crimes that the average Canadian would do 25 years in prison for. If you were caught in human trafficking, money laundering to these rates, fraud, you add up all those sentences, the average Canadian third class, second class subject, meaning private business or Canadian working class person, you do 25 years in jail. And USA, that's a life sentence, really, when you add up all those. And you'll see white-collar criminals in the United States, American citizens, held to that no matter where they are in the world. And not the same for Canada, not for their first class, not for the Crown Sworn. Those aren't crimes. You can't. We have diplomatic immunity. We're free to do whatever. Sucks to be you, America. And at what point, when this befalls Canadians, when so much deterioration occurs and America is economically isolated us and we're at these levels where Canadians are starving, Canadians are losing everything, mass homelessness, poverty, starvation, disease. When do Canadians start trying to flood the American border? The biggest border in North America unsecured. What do you think Donald J. Trump foresees? He knows where he's going, as did Joe Biden's administration before him, as did President Donald J. Trump's first administration, and then the Barack Obama before that, the George W. Bush before that, and we can go on and on. It's been escalating. Started in 1985 when everything was beautiful, and it's little by little, by a lot, by massive, by exponential rates of USA responding to the evil of Canada. Whether it be conservative or liberal, did not matter. These truths were always present. They've always been there. It didn't matter the party. And that's what Canadians really need to wake up to in an absolute hurry. Because the destruction's coming. And you're going to find yourself all of a sudden, all the social programs dry up. All of a sudden, World Bank, International Monetary Fund, World Credit calculators turn around and tell your Canadian Prime Minister, your 10 premiers and your 3 territorial premiers, we're sorry. Your ink isn't worth the paper it's written on for your dollar. You can't be trusted in lending anymore. Your credit rating is so low now because you don't have any investment. Canada's not a good investment. And if you haven't been paying attention, there's literally no investment coming into Canada at all this year. Literally none from the global pool. Everything's drying up. And by January, when you roll the new year, you show me $1. Which countries are going to be investing in Canada? Oh, Carney's got all these promises. Oh, yeah? See it to believe it. Because until you have that money, until you have that country on paper committed, and financial banking industries committed, or central banking authorities committed to Canada, you've got nothing. And what I see is nothing. 2 days ago, we watched all of Mark Carney's banking WEF empire turn around and drop his agenda, drop the Agenda 2050 that only right now provincial governments of Canada and the Canadian government are implementing. Every other country's central bank or private banks, call them charter banks for some of those other crown institutions, are all pulled out of Mark Carney, who created it. Created it first in Canada, and then as governor of the Bank of UK London, drafted it there. And for a while he had the Commonwealth and the European Union all in there. He had over 50 institutions committed to him. But now since Donald J. Trump, in the last days of office, since ascending in January, Till now, they've all but disappeared on Mark Carney. They've all said, no, we're out. You're on your own. He's all alone with only his Canadian chartered banks, the control of the Central Bank of Canada, and all provincial governments in Canada. Elbows up, idiots. That's where we are. This is my video. This is 1985 to 2025, where we find ourselves as Canadians today. And I hope, especially for the oldest of us Canadians, you know the things I went through here tonight. You lived them. I'm reminding you of those times, those years, those transitions. You should know it. You should know it. So many Canadians, at least over the age of 50, this should be ringing bells in your ears. 1985, Brian Mulroney should be ringing bells in your ears, and everything every government did since then, whether they were liberal or conservative. And this idea, the last point I'm going to make, that somehow, well, this person didn't do the agenda against the United States as bad as the other one. That doesn't cut it, and America's been very clear to you. It didn't matter. They said, it's only 50 Americans a week dead from the drug trafficking and cartels that we've imported into Canada. We're not as bad as Mexico. We're only murdering 50 Americans a week and destroying 30,000 families a month in the United States. It's nowhere near what Mexico's doing. That's the wrong answer. That's an answer a sick, twisted, most vile narcissist, border psychopath, and really a psychopath when you deal in life like that and you say, the life isn't worth, it's not that many, who cares? That is the wrong answer. And if that doesn't tell every Canadian that your government doesn't even think of you in the realm of love or normalcy, they look at you as property, as fodder, as chattel, and it's always been Canada's truth since 1867. If you have family roots that were first settlers to Canada, just the trip to Canada and what you went through and how you were treated on those ships by the Crown, that should tell you everything. If you don't know those stories, my mother still has those stories from her great-grandmother. Even at my mom's age now, she can still articulate those stories of what she was taught as a young girl from her great-grandmother about the ships. She was alive in that time to hear the story of someone who went on those ships. The filth, the stench, the stink, everything you had, and it was not what you were told, just how badly you were treated on those ships. Like chattel, maybe even worse. And people sick, coughing, and how awful that was. Can you imagine? You were promised so much, but really it was always the Crown's lie that you're just an animal. And we've always been that way in their eyes, and we always will be. There is no equality of the person in Canada. Never has been, never will be. We will be debt-loaded slave subjects for the rest of our lives, and our children will always have a worse life than we ever had going forward. And if people don't see that, I don't know what to tell you. Show me the prosperity of everything we've done in Canada in the last 15 years. Where is the prosperity? People would say, oh, I got a nice home. Everything's great for me. But where is the prosperity and wealth? Why are we so far in debt? Why are the children of today without any future? Why is there so much homelessness? Why are all these things astronomical? Why are all provincial debts through the roof? Why are all city municipal debts through the roof? Why are all federal debts through the roof? Why are house debt to GDP, household debt to GDP rates off the charts? Why are our homes so valued beyond any measure of reasonable in this Arctic climate? Beyond any measurable reality, way past the United States, with a way better climate? way better development, way better infrastructure, way better services, which you can understand. If it's developed, you can understand these other costs. A military like that, the cost, but why do we have nothing to show for mass amounts of debt? Corporate debt to GDP ratio beyond any of the G7 countries. Off the charts. And you know who has to insure all that debt? You, me, everybody. All our children are born into it. If that's not absolute slavery, I don't know what is. Anyways, folks, that's my video. Get it out there. It's late. That was a 1 hour. I hope it finds a lot of people well. God bless.